Ever get lost down like a rabbit hole, looking at your family tree online? You see a name and a date, maybe a blurry photo, and you think, what was their story?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're diving into a story you wanted us to uncover, um, the life of your sixth great-grandmother, Sarah Joyce Elms.
Okay.
And let me tell you, the document you sent, Sarah Joyce Elms, my sixth paternal great-grandmother, A Life in Sussex, England, by Paul Elms Bacardi,
Right.
is full of these little details that really make her come alive.
And what's fascinating is that while Sarah's world in 18th century rural England might seem a million miles from ours,
Oh, yeah?
you'll be surprised by how much of her story resonates, with the human experience even centuries later.
For sure. So the document starts in 1748, Billingshurst, Sussex picture, a tiny village, no streetlights,
Wow.
let alone cars. And we learn Sarah's father, Robert Joyce, was a grain merchant.
Okay.
Now, I might have glossed over that, but thankfully you're here to tell me what that actually meant back then.
Right, because today we just pop to the supermarket for a loaf of bread.
Right.
But in 18th century England, grain was everything. Robert being a merchant meant he wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was vital to the community's survival, buying and selling the food that literally kept people alive. That gave the family a certain standing, not rich,
Right.
but stable, usually.
And her mother, Elizabeth, the document says she ran their home, which, knowing the period, was basically another full-time job.
Absolutely. We're talking about a time before modern conveniences. Elizabeth would have been responsible for everything from cooking and cleaning to managing any household staff, gardening, maybe even tending to chickens or a cow, all while raising Sarah and any siblings. It boggles the mind.
Makes you appreciate a takeout menu, huh?
Oh, yeah.
But what's really interesting is that Sarah, this document, says she could read and write. Now, I know that wasn't a given back then, especially for girls.
You're right. That was incredibly unusual. Most people, even in a village like Billingshurst, wouldn't have been literate. The fact that Sarah's father, a grain merchant, not a nobleman or anything, made sure she got that education,
Yeah.
that speaks volumes. He was perhaps forward-thinking or maybe just deeply valued learning. Either way, it set Sarah apart.
Okay, now it's really hitting me. This isn't just a name on a page anymore. This is a young woman who loved poetry, even took long walks in the Sussex countryside, which the document makes sound idyllic, by the way, giving very early Jane Austen vibes.
And just like in an Austen novel, where a seemingly chance encounter can change everything, enter Charles Elms.
Now, the document makes it sound almost like a fairy tale,
Right.
but you have to wonder how much of it was about love and how much was, well, 18th century practicality.
Right, because marriage back then wasn't always about finding your soulmate. It was often about securing your future, especially for women. Charles, being a tenant farmer, would have represented a certain level of stability. Not wealthy, but respectable, hardworking.
And likely, that held a lot of weight for Sarah's family. It wasn't just her happiness at stake, it was her security in a world with far fewer safety nets than we have today.
Exactly. And for Charles, a wife would have been essential for running the farm and raising a family, which, speaking of, the document mentions they had 7 children.
Wow.
5 daughters, no less.
Okay, that's a lot of mouths to feed, even on a good harvest. It makes you wonder about Sarah's daily life raising that many kids in those times, while also contributing to the farm work.
Imagine it was a 24/7 job. Children, especially back then, sadly, didn't always survive. So having a large family was common, but also incredibly demanding.
Right.
It wasn't just childcare, it was also teaching them the skills they'd need to survive in that world.
Which, thankfully for Sarah's daughters, included reading. The document mentions she taught them just like she'd learned from her own father. It's like this little thread of education passing down through the generations.
It's a testament to the value Sarah placed on learning, even amidst the relentless demands of farm life. It makes you wonder, did she use those skills herself? Did she read to the children, share stories, perhaps even find solace in poetry during the quiet moments?
Ooh, good point. It's easy to get caught up in the practicalities of the era, but we know Sarah loved poetry as a young woman. To think maybe she found refuge in those words, even as her life became busier, more challenging. It humanizes her in a way that just listing the facts doesn't quite capture.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even within the confines of their roles, wife, mother, farmer women like Sarah found ways to express themselves, to nurture their own minds and spirits.
And speaking of nurturing, the document doesn't just focus on the work. There's this touching detail about Sarah singing with her children. It's such a universal image, right? Even centuries ago, music was that bonding force.
And remember, this wasn't just entertainment. In a world without electricity, singing was how they passed time, marked special occasions, even soothed anxieties. Imagine Sarah teaching them those songs, her voice weaving through their little farmhouse. It's like a direct link to our own past.
And it wasn't just her family, she had an impact on. Later in life, the document calls Sarah a respected matriarch, not just a mother, but a figure of authority in the community. What do you think earned her that title?
It's a powerful phrase, isn't it? And it suggests that Sarah's wisdom, her experience raising 7 children, probably her resilience through whatever hardships, farm life threw at her, it all added up to something admirable. People clearly looked to her for guidance, for support.
It's amazing to think about this woman who loved poetry, raised this huge family, and ended up a pillar of her community, all in a time when life was incredibly tough, especially compared to our cushy modern existence.
Right. And think about this. The document mentions she lived to see grandchildren. Now, that might seem like a given, but back then, with the high rates of illness and child mortality, it was a victory in itself. She got to experience that continuation of her line, the legacy she helped create.
It really makes you consider your own family's story, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
what would my 6th great-grandchild think looking back at Miles' life? Hopefully they'll find some interesting details too, though maybe not as much farm work involved.
Right.
But
And that's the beauty of genealogy, isn't it? We get this glimpse into one life, Sarah's in this case, and it sparks this curiosity about all the lives that came before us. And the document you shared is just the tip of the iceberg. There could be parish records, letters, maybe even diaries out there waiting to be discovered.
it's like we've opened a treasure chest, but
Yeah.
only pulled out one gold coin. Who knows what else is hidden in those archives, just waiting to shed even more light on Sarah's story, and by extension, your own family history.
Exactly. Each document, each little detail adds another layer to our understanding of the past and of ourselves.
Well said. And on that note, it's time to surface from this deep dive into Sarah Joyce Elms' life. A huge thank you to YU for sharing this fascinating document, and to everyone listening, who knows what stories are waiting to be uncovered in your family tree. Until next time, happy digging.